What's happening, everybody? We got another Showdown slate to break down today. So I'm going to be walking you guys through DraftKings as well as FanDuel using the sim stores that we have at Stokastic.com. If you guys could do me a favor while you're watching this video, like, follow, subscribe, and then also, we had a giveaway that we did yesterday. It was which bench player would score the most fantasy points. And the winner, well, there was a lot of people who guessed TJ McConnell. So there was a lot of people that I had to throw into a randomizer and figure out who it was that actually ended up winning the giveaway. And that is going to be Douglas Song 3125. You win yourself a free Odd Shopper subscription. DM me on Twitter and I can get you set up with that. And also, for today, I'm going to be doing another giveaway for today. It's going to be which player overall in the game scores the most fantasy points. The only caveat, you can't pick Luka Doncic or Anthony Edwards. So any other player from this game can't be Ant, can't be Luka. Let me know. Leave a comment which player scores the most fantasy points outside of those two. And same deal. I'm going to go through all the answers, pile all the people that get the right one, randomize it, pick one of those people to win a free Odd Shopper subscription. For everybody else, though, we are running a promo where if you sign up at Odd Shopper with the promo code DINGER, you get access for 1 week for $1. And I'm pretty confident these are tools that are going to pay for themselves. These are my betting results using Odd Shopper for the year. So up around right around $10,000 for the year, just tailing the bets that are available up on Odd Shopper. So go check that out, guys. I think it is something that definitely pays for itself with just a $1 investment there. But let's talk about tonight's NBA slate, starting with DraftKings, and then we'll make our way over to FanDuel as well. So I've already built out and simmed lineups for DK, and then FanDuel, I've built out lineups. I'll pull them up and simulate them right after we run through DraftKings. As far as my highest projected lineup by Sim ROI here on DK, it is Kyrie Irving in the captain spot with Anthony Edwards, Daniel Gafford, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, and Rudy Gobert rounding it out. And one thing I am noticing by looking at most of my top projected lineup, well, actually all of my top projected ROI lineups, Luka's not in any of them in the multiplier spot, which I assume is going to be kind of for the same reasons that the top projected lineups yesterday didn't have Jason Tatum in the multiplier spot, which is it was really hard to build unique lineups with Jason Tatum in that multiplier spot. What ended up being the nuts yesterday, it was Drew Holiday in the multiplier spot. So I think that this is going to be another slate where it makes sense to build some lineups that don't have Luka in that multiplier spot. But let's see, if we go ahead and look at the dupes here, the lineups that are expected to be duped most frequently, a lot of them have Luka in the multiplier spot. Not all of them, but most of them do here. This lineup here expected to be duped 62 times. So this is the most heavily duped lineup. It is Luka in the multiplier spot with Ant, Josh Green, Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Rudy Gobert. One thing we should note here as well, Mike Conley is officially questionable to play. I'm very confident that he ends up playing, but just want to point it out to you guys that he is questionable on the injury report. Other lineups here that are expected to be heavily duped. This one is Cat in the multiplier spot. This one is Luka, Gobert, Gobert, Luka, Luka, Gobert, then Luka, Gobert, Gobert. So yeah, actually a little bit more spread out than what I thought. One thing that is very common about these lineups that are duped heavily, though, almost all of them are using all of the salary with the exception of this one that is $4,800, this one $4,800, this one $49 here, but all of the other ones, $50,000 in salary. So just kind of a rule of thumb. If you use all of the salary in Showdown, unless you're like crazy unique at some spots, pretty good chance you're going to be duped fairly heavily. But let's go ahead now and start looking at some of the player exposures. What are we getting to? Starting with the captain spot, and we'll also look at the ownership here. And yeah, Luka's popular in this captain spot. Nothing too crazy, though. 28% projected ownership for Luka. That does make him the most popular captain, and I do end up coming in underweight to the field on him, but it's not like yesterday where Tatum ended up being projected to be crazy chalk in the captain spot, and he did come up a little bit underweight to his captain ownership, but he was still by far the most popular captain play on the slate. So what the Sims are giving me instead of Luka is Anthony Edwards in the multiplier spot, which I'm totally okay with. Modest ownership on Luka, just 13%. One thing that is surprising to me here, 19% projected captain ownership for Rudy Gobert, which I guess is just a product of the salary on the slate and what playing Rudy Gobert in that multiplier spot opens up for you, because Rudy Gobert is somebody who the field and the public just typically doesn't like all that much. We do often see him go under-owned in DFS tournaments, so maybe he does end up being a little bit lower owned than the projections just because the projections are so math-based and there is kind of an inherent bias where people just don't like Rudy Gobert. So maybe that lowers his ownership a little bit, but he's looking like the most popular mid-range captain, and I also am coming in underweight to him. So the captains that I am getting to most overweight to the field to that look best to me in tournaments: Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, and Kyrie Irving. Especially if you're going to build a lineup that doesn't have Luka in the captain spot, here's where Kyrie really makes a lot of sense, because in what kind of a scenario does Luka not have a massive Luka type game? And it's, well, Kyrie has a really big game, and then Kyrie has the ball in his hands a little bit more. We see Kyrie's usage go up a little bit, maybe his assist rate jumps, and that would come at the expense of Luka's fantasy production. So only 5% projected ownership to Kyrie Irving in the captain spot. He looks like the best contrarian captain to be getting to. Some of the other ones that land in some lineups for me, Naz Reid is 3.9%, Daniel Gafford 5.8%, but I'm not all that much different from the field, whereas I am quite a bit overweight to Kyrie Irving here. That's a contrarian captain I'm liking for today. In the flex spots here, who am I getting to the most overall? Rudy Gobert, he is in 40% of my lineups. And let's see, what was that price point again on Gobert? Rudy Gobert is, 8,000 in the flex spots, so 12,000 in the captain. And just considering how good of a fantasy producer we know that Rudy Gobert is, and I know there's this narrative that Rudy Gobert gets played off the court in the playoffs. It's not really entirely true, though. Like, we've seen times in the past where, maybe a Rudy Gobert team is down really considerably in the fourth quarter and they're trying to get more shooting on the court and might come off. But it's not really been an issue for Rudy Gobert at all in this playoffs. If we go ahead and we look at how many minutes he's playing per game, I don't really think there's a realistic reason to think that Rudy Gobert is going to be played off the court. I mean, last series, for instance, against the Denver Nuggets, we saw Rudy Gobert play 36 minutes. In the Game 7 win, he played 30 minutes in Game 6, but keep in mind, that was a game that it was 115-70. The Timberwolves won the game by 45 points, so we just didn't have to close that game. Then 40 minutes, 36 minutes, 27 minutes, once again in a blowout, and then 35 minutes in Game 1 of that series. So we saw really big minutes for Rudy Gobert last series, and that's been the case throughout the playoffs. Not really a concern for me. Rudy Gobert at his price point looks like a really solid play in the mid-range. Once again, is very popular here. So while he is my most rostered player in the flex, I do come in a little bit underweight to the field because his overall ownership, when you put together both his flex as well as his captain ownership, I mean, it's about 2/3 of the field is playing Rudy Gobert. So great points per dollar play. If you're playing cash games, get Rudy Gobert in there. For tournaments, looks like he'll be a little bit underweight to the field on Rudy. Also getting to a good amount of Naz Reid here, Karl Anthony Towns. Derek Lively is showing up in lineups more so than Daniel Gafford. So if you're trying to consider which big man to play from the Dallas Mavericks, our data does prefer Derek Lively to Daniel Gafford. Also, a little bit of a contrarian play. It's hard to find guys that are crazy contrarian for one game slates, but 26% ownership on Derek Lively, that's not all that popular. And it is a good pivot off of Daniel Gafford because Gafford is 44% owned. So in a scenario where Lively plays really well and closes out the game, which we've seen a few times throughout the course of the playoffs, that is going to give you good leverage on the field when Gafford is going to have nearly twice the ownership that Derek Lively does. So I like that pivot there by getting lineups with Lively as opposed to Daniel Gafford. And then some other options here, Mike Conley coming in overweight to him. And then also overweight to Kyrie Irving. So overweight to Kyrie Irving in both the flex and the captain spots here. Luka coming in underweight to the field on Luka as well in the utility spot. So overall, I have Luka in about 50% of my lineups here, whereas the field is expected to have him in like 70% of lineups, or maybe even closer to 75. Yeah. So Luka looks great, but once again, just kind of hard to build unique lineups with him. And that is something that drags down the simulated ROI of some of those Luka lineups. So not a bad player to be underweight to the field to. Obviously, if you're playing like 20 lineups, you don't want to full fade Luka. But if you had him in 10 of those lineups, I think that's a pretty reasonable way to get some exposure, make some Luka lineups that leave salary on the table while still being underweight to him in the aggregate. Let's see what other options we're getting to as far as leverage. So underweight to Luka, underweight to Gafford. We touched on that. Then also a little bit underweight to the field here on Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which I don't mind. One thing that we start to see at this point in time in the playoffs is teams rely on their starters more, their best players. And as a result, some guys who are bench players kind of fall not entirely by the wayside because teams do still have to go to the bench, but they lose out on some of their upside because they don't really have a massive ceiling unless some starters start to get into foul trouble. So for instance, in the final two games against the Denver Nuggets, we only saw Nickeil Alexander-Walker play 16.5 and 17.5 minutes. That's going to drag down his expected production. This is a game one, so maybe he's not quite as limited as he was in the last couple games of that series, but barring foul trouble, I'm not expecting like 25 minutes or anything from Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and he is quite popular. Players that we are overweight to the field to here, Jaden McDaniels, pretty low ownership on him, sub 20%, so McDaniels makes sense. PJ Washington has gotten to be more expensive. He was terrific in the Mavericks last round against OKC. We saw some big ceiling games out of PJ Washington. So I'll be curious to see if his ownership goes up over the course of the day. But if we're really going to be getting single-digit ownership on PJ Washington, sign me up for him as a contrarian option to be getting to. Talked about Derek Lively already, and then also Mike Conley and Kyrie Irving rounding out some of the other utility plays that I'm getting myself overweight to the field to here for DraftKings. So that's going to do it for DK. Let's go and look at lineups now for FanDuel. So go over to the contest generator. Click on FanDuel here. And if you guys haven't done it yet, just do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Don't forget about the giveaway. Let me know below in the comment section which player outside of Anthony Edwards and Luka Doncic scores the most fantasy points. I'll be randomly selecting one person who gets the answer correct to get a free Odd Shopper subscription. That's our betting site. But let's see here. All right, I'll restore the lineups that I've already built in the Sims here. And let's sim it out. What is the percentage to first on FanDuel? It is, let's see, we've got FanDuel's big contest today is a $150,000 prize pool with $50K to first place. All right, so a lot more top heavy today. So we'll select 30% to first, and we'll see what kind of results that gives us. So now, considering that FanDuel is paying out a lot more top heavy than DK, I am making the assumption that is going to lead to our top sim ROI lineups being even more contrarian on FanDuel than DraftKings. So probably a lot of them won't have Luka. We'll probably have some weird stuff in the MVP spot, like maybe Ant Edwards, maybe Kyrie Irving. But let's see what the sims say. Maybe it is Luka lineups because he projects so much better than everybody else. And maybe we're getting contrarian at like the pro and the star spots. I'm interested to see what it looks like. One thing you definitely do want to do when the slate is paying out 30% to first place, definitely want to prioritize being a little bit more contrarian how you can, which I was kind of touching on before, but even something like leaving more salary on the table, pretty reasonable to do here on FanDuel. All right, let's favorite the top 150. And of these top lineups, yeah, only a couple of them have Luka in the MVP spot. And of the ones that do, this one see as PJ Washington and Mike Conley in the multiplier spots. This one is Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley. So some more contrarian players to pair with Luka in those multiplier spots to make it somewhat of a unique lineup, because these ones are not expected to really be duped heavily. Top overall projected lineup by Sim ROI. Karl Anthony Towns in the MVP with Luka and Rudy Gobert in the other multiplier spots. And then Daniel Gafford and Nickeil Alexander-Walker in those flex spots. That is the top overall projected Sim ROI lineup. And there's another one here that's projecting really well from a Sim ROI perspective. We got two of them that are expected to have a simulated ROI of north of 200%. The other one here does have Luka in that multiplier spot with PJ Washington, Mike Conley, then Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively. I don't really love playing Gafford and Lively together because there is a for sure negative correlation there. But if our sims are telling us that there aren't going to be that many lineups that have the two of them together, then there is a contrarian angle where it's like, hey, a couple of lineups with Gafford and Lively still do project out well together just because of how seldom we use that combination might be. But let's go and look at what lineups are expected to be duped most heavily. And yeah, with us playing this sim with the 30% payout to first, none of these heavily duped lineups showing up towards the top of our sim ROI. And yeah, these are almost exclusively Luka lineups. Yeah, Luka. These are all Luka. Here, finally, there's an Edwards lineup that's duped 44 times. But almost every single lineup that's expected to be heavily duped today is a Luka lineup that uses all or close to all of the salary. So once again, talked about it on DraftKings, going to bring it up on FanDuel here. If you're playing Luka in the MVP spot, and if you're not leaving any salary on the table, you're probably playing a lineup that's going to be duped a few hundred times by the field. Really, really hard to build good lineups with that kind of construction. So let's see what is looking good. Exposures, let's go to this MVP spot. And yeah, 70% projected ownership for Luka in the MVP spot. So yeah, there are some unique lineups that project well with him. However, only 27% of my top 150 lineups have Luka just because of what that ownership is. Instead, some players who I like being overweight to in that MVP spot, Anthony Edwards first and foremost, And then also some Kyrie Irving lineups, same reason we talked about on DraftKings. If Luka doesn't have, that like 30-point triple-double type game, maybe it's Kyrie Irving who goes out and makes a bunch of shots, scores 30 points, maybe gets 7 assists and a few rebounds out of Kyrie Irving. So I like him as a super contrarian option, only 2.7% projected ownership for him in the MVP spot. So it's not the most likely scenario, but it's like if this slate played out 100 times, would Kyrie Irving be the highest scorer more than 3 of those times? I think probably. So that's where he makes sense to be overweight to. And then Cat and Gobert, they're also projected for just 2% ownership each. Those are guys that are worth a couple of shares if you guys are playing multiple lineups. Let's look at the pro and the star spots. I'll start here with the star and the star players that I'm getting to most predominantly. Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. No real crazy chalk here. We do have Kyrie at 25%, Anthony Edwards at 27% projected ownership. So do come in a little bit underweight to each of them. Getting to some of Mike Conley. Well, actually only like a couple lineups with Mike Conley. And then PJ Washington, only projected for 1% ownership here in the star spot. So he looks like somebody to be getting to be really unique with. But Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Kyrie Irving, these are the ones that are the most logical plays in the star spot. In the pro spot here, we do have some chalk on Rudy Gobert. He's really the only one that's all that popular. Only player with north of 17% projected ownership in the pro spot. So getting to him at 20%, then Mike Conley at 19%. PJ Washington once again showing up as an overweight play at 17%. No real kinds of crazy stands at this spot, but yeah, these are the core players that are standing out the most in the Sims if you guys are looking to figure out who to play in the pro spot. And then if we look at that flex/utility, who are the ones that are showing up the most here? Daniel Gafford, Mike Conley, Derrick Jones Jr., Derek Lively, Naz Reid. And in general, I don't love the idea of playing Lively and Gafford together. So if you are hand building lineups, my preference is to not play them together. So the Sims might find a couple of lineups that project well, but still there's negative correlation there. It's my preference to not play them in the same lineup, everybody. Leverage, who am I underweight to in the flex spot? Same deal as over on DraftKings, getting underweight to the field on Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I do question his upside as somebody who comes off the bench and did see his minutes start to dissipate a little bit towards the tail end of the series against Denver. And then Naz Reid, Kyle Anderson, a couple other players I'm underweight to the field too, kind of for similar reasons. Where Derek Lively is a little bit different is even though he does come off the bench, him and Daniel Gafford share the center minutes, and it's not a situation where we see games where it's like Gafford plays 35 minutes and you only get 13 out of Derek Lively. It's closer to a 20-20 to a 24-24 split, with whoever plays better for the game getting like 2-3 extra minutes at the expense of the other. Players that were overweight to here in the flex spot: Derek Lively, Mike Conley, PJ Washington, Jaden McDaniels. So yeah, I was overweight to PJ Washington in the star spot, in the pro spot, as well as the utility spot. So with him projected for such low ownership on FanDuel and DraftKings, he looks like the most logical contrarian play to be getting to today. So that's going to do it for us today on the NBA Strategy Show here. If you haven't done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, comment below to let me know which player scores the most fantasy points that isn't Luka Doncic or Anthony Edwards. And if you want to sign up for any of the packages we have here at Stokastic, links for that are below in the description box. If you want to sign up for our Sims tool to help you build some unique Showdown lineups, we got that in the description box. Then also sign up at OddsShopper, promo code DINGER, get access for just $1. Good luck. See you guys later tonight on NBA Live Before Lock, as well as the playback show. Have a good night.